PokeClass is sponsored by CollectorsCash.com, your #1 online store for all you need for the Pokemon trading card game. They have all the top competitive and collector's cards on the market at prices you won't find lower anywhere else. Whether you're after tins and packs from the current format, or just looking for those hard to get primes to finish off your deck, Collector's Cash is your place to go. Make sure you check them out at www.collectorscash.com. Welcome to PokeClass episode 44, where we're about halfway through the first Battle Roads portion of the 2011-2012 season. The US have had a lot of events already, and we have a fair few results which I'm going to be talking about today, and should help out those of you fellow UK players in your choices, since our events are throughout the rest of October. So let's get straight to it. So the new season is now officially in full swing, and players are hitting a ton of events to start collecting the new championship points that are up for grabs. These small Battle Roads tournaments were considered a fun tournament before the points were introduced, but now they have become a much more competitive event with the points towards Worlds up for grabs. These extra 1 or 2 points could mean the difference between going to Worlds and not, so everyone is out to win in these next month or so. This episode, we're going to have a look at what's winning so far out in the US, and what could happen in the tournament still to come. So let's start by looking at the list of winners, and here it is. Once again, we have ourselves a deck at the top that honestly no one really wants to be there, Zekrom. No matter which variant it is, with or without Tornadus, this deck is almost too good. With the use of Catcher every turn, and the possibility of either a turn 180 with Tornadus, or a turn 120 with Zekrom, your Pokemon are going to be dropping fast up against this deck. The deck has great matchups against anything with Yanmega, and it now has a much better matchup against Donphan with the new addition of Tornadus from Emerging Powers. Now, saying that no one really wants to see it there is probably a little bit harsh, but as you can guess, I'm not a huge fan of the deck. Its speed is pretty crazy, and as soon as you've gotten rid of a single Zekrom, there's another one just a collector away, along with its energy accelerating counterparts, to hit you with another 120 damage. A lot of players have obviously realised this advantage that Zekrom has, along with the release of Catcher, and people are taking full advantage of it in this set of events. I personally haven't done a lot of testing with Zekrom myself, but I have done quite a bit against it, and I must say that going first against it is pretty crucial, and unfortunately that isn't something you can control yourself. But if you are expecting a lot of Zekrom at your local tournament, then here's a couple of things that you can do to tackle it. The first thing to consider is to run a variant of Donphan. If you're able to set up a Donphan with heavy impact going, you should be able to win the game in a pretty nice fashion, even if they do include Tornadus. Don't get me wrong, Tornadus will give you an issue here, but include a fair amount of junk arm to utilise Switch a bit more often, to switch into something like Yanmega, and you have yourself a pretty decent deck against Zekrom. I'd probably say the deck of choice would be Stage 1s against a pretty Zekrom heavy metagame, since you'll be able to play against their weakness with Donphan, have another answer to both Zekrom and Tornadus with Zoroark, and Yanmega deals well with putting damage onto Tornadus pretty early on as well. Stage 1s can also keep up with the speed of Zekrom pretty well, if given a fairly decent draw, and things like Plus Power gives you that option to one-hit KO Zekrom even earlier on, with Donphan's Earthquake or Zoroark's Foul Play. Another pretty decent Stage 1 against Zekrom is Cinccino from Black and White. With a full bench, Cinccino can take down a Zekrom after a Volt Strike for just a double colourless. But the downside is that you can easily suffer a KO back from either Zekrom or Tornadus next turn with a single Plus Power, which could prove quite the waste of resources to get it there in the first place. This matchup for any deck is going to be a straight up prize race, so you're going to need to either keep up with taking prizes every single turn, or keep track of their energy if you can make it to the late game and then take advantage there. Unfortunately, there isn't a whole lot you can do against this deck when it gets going, and you aren't having the best game, since that is what the deck thrives on. Keep up with it and you have a pretty good chance, and make sure you only bench basics when absolutely necessary to limit their capture KOs, but it's all about how fast they can get going in this one. So enough moaning about Zekrom, and it's on to our second place deck so far, Reshiram Typhlosion. This deck was bound to be sitting at the top spots after its incredible performance at Worlds. there are only a few tweaks needed to be made to allow it to be as capture friendly as possible, and that has certainly worked well so far. Many lists are going to be running a pretty thick 4-2-4 Typhlosion line and will definitely run capture of their own, specifically for the late game to clear up those last few prizes in the game. I would say that this has pretty good matchups across the board and can have a strong game throughout if those two Typhlosions hit the field. I'd probably expect a few lists to be running that single black belt to deal with Gothitelle, and most lists will still be running Ninetales along with cards like Sharon to allow for maximum draw to get set up as fast as possible. If you're expecting quite a bit of Reshifusion at your Battle Rose, then you should maybe look into a deck like Magnezone Yanmega, so that you can take prizes early on with Yanmega and take down those big Reshirams fairly easily during the mid to late game with Magnezone's Lost Burn. Stage 1s can also be pretty effective against this deck when the turn 2 attacker hits the field, and Pokemon like Donphan and Zoroark will help this matchup considerably. A fresh Donphan can withstand a blue flare without plus powers, which can give the opponent some issues when you're attacking for 60, or possibly even 90, preparing it for a KO the following turn. Zoroark will be able to KO Reshirams your opponent is setting up on the bench with its foul play, but you do need to watch out for Typhlosion's attack when playing against this with stage 1s. They can use Flare Blitz to discard your lone fighting energy on a Donphan and double colourless for Zoroark, leaving them stranded in the active spot with nothing to do, which can buy them some time to set up even further. However, decks that really do thrive in a Reshiram heavy metagame are Vileplume variants, specifically Ross's deck from Worlds. As shown at the tournament just a few months ago, this deck can completely take apart a Reshiram Typhlosion deck with its swapping of damage with Uniclus, healing with Blissey, blocking of Rare Candy with Vileplume, and constant one-hit KOs with Suicune Legend. As soon as the lock is set up and the Legend hits the field, it's pretty much game over for Reshiram, since it can't take a one-hit KO on it unless Black Belt is involved, and Suicune Legend will take constant prizes until the game is over. This is another reason why we're seeing a thicker line of Typhlosion in these decks, along with the Black Belt techs, to help them get over the lock and squeeze out a victory in the end. Overall, this deck is still as popular as ever and is winning events all over the US. Definitely make sure you're prepared for this one as well. In third place, we have ourselves Yanmega Magnezone, the so-called secret deck of US Nationals. This deck is pretty much putting both of the most versatile and powerful Pokemon in the format together into a deck to make a fast powerhouse with pretty good matchups across the board. We aren't really seeing a whole load of changes from Worlds, apart from people running much slicker versions of the deck, such as taking out Jirachi for Pachirisu and running either a thicker line of Kingdra or not running it at all. In the breakdown of which variants of Yanmega Magnezone are winning, we actually have ourselves 3 straight versions of the deck and 2 that included Kingdra Prime. Kingdra is still completely viable in this deck since it brings so many Pokemon into one-hit KO range, saving energy in the long run. However, the release of Pokemon Capture has put players off running just a single 1-0-1 line of it, and either drop it completely to save it getting KO'd and becoming useless, or bump up to a 2-1-2 line to make sure that a single Capture KO won't render it a dead card for the rest of the game. If I were running the deck, I would go for taking it out completely and go for thicker lines of Yanmega and Magnezone just to stay as consistent as possible and matchups can be dealt with without it. Other than that, we don't really have any big changes in the list and everything's staying the same for Yanmega Magnezone. It's still a huge contender and will be seen in a lot of tournaments for those who can afford to run it. If you're expecting a lot of this in your event, then a deck choice such as Reshiram Typhlosion and Trainer Lock variants are both very strong choices since they provide the harder matchups for the deck. Trainer Lock will be your best bet if you can get Vileplume up and running quickly to block their rare candies, and just attack with the big hitting Zekrom and Donphan as much as you can to the weaknesses of the main attackers. This deck probably has the most even matchups across the array of decks we've seen so far at Battle Roads, so simple testing time after time against this deck with whatever you choose will give you the best form of chance when you sit down at the tables. Another one of the top 3 to centre your testing around since it can't be swayed too much by certain deck choices. So those are pretty much the biggest threats for Battle Roads so far, and looking at the table, we have ourselves some pretty interesting results lower down. The main one is the performance of the so-called best deck in format, Gothitelle Uniclus. This deck was set to be taking first place victory cups all over the place, but it just hasn't been doing as well as everyone thought, which could be put down to 1 or 2 main points. The first is the time issue. Gothitelle would thrive in a completely untimed tournament since it can easily go down 4 or even 5 prizes and still win the game. But in a timed environment of just 30 minutes plus 3 turns, this deck is going to lose no matter what the definitive final outcome could have been. Is it just too slow to keep up with the format we have right now? Another thing possibly slowing it down is the fact that people are teching against it. Cards I mentioned above like Black Belt are slipping their way into decks that Gothitelle should be able to beat without any problems, which is tipping the matchup much more away from Gothitelle than it was before. I've actually covered a lot more about this deck in my recent 6 prizes article, which you'll be able to find a link for in the description below, so go and check that out if you want 4 different lists of Gothitelle to try out at your own battle roads. Another pretty surprising, or rather amazing thing about this list is that there are so many decks out there winning events. In total, we have ourselves 22 different decks taking tournaments across the country, which is actually incredible compared to the likes of last format. It's great that we can have this kind of diversity in the game, and actually it makes much more challenging to build decks and play in tournaments, trying to cover as much as you can without sacrificing too much consistency. This is definitely a good time to be part of the game with all the change and diversity we're having at the moment. So that's pretty much the first 2 weeks of Battle Road summed up for you, and what changes we're seeing in some decks as they develop over time. I hope you all have a blast at the tournaments you go to and bring home some victory cups and those all important championship points. Over here in the UK, the majority of our battle roads are all the way through October, and I should be going to Manchester this weekend, Nottingham the weekend after that, and then Sutton Coldfield the weekend after that. If you're going to any of those events, then I'll see you there, and I'll be sure to let you know how I get on, along with more results from across the whole country next week. For now, thanks for watching this week's episode of PokeClass. Make sure you rate, comment and subscribe in the bottom left or top right corner in a second, and I'll see you all next week.